Iran is currently being attacked. Its cities are getting bombed, its generals are being killed, and its infrastructure is being shattered. So, where's its allies? Where's its top ally? Where is Russia during Iran's hour of need? Strange. Nowhere to be found. There's no air defense coming from Russia. There's no arms shipments coming from Russia. There's not even a threat to intervene coming from Russia. And why is that? It's for a simple reason. It's because Russia doesn't defend its allies. It uses them and then it disappears. And let's be clear, this isn't a policy oversight by Russia. This is the Russian strategy. This is Russia's doctrine. Use, abandon, and then take advantage of the situation. Ask the Ukrainians, ask the Armenians, ask the Kyrgyz, ask the Syrians. Look at Ukraine. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine inherited the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Now, the West pushed Ukraine to get out of that, and in 1994, Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum. But in return was giving up its nukes, it would receive security guarantees. And Ukraine received security guarantees from the US, the UK, and Russia in exchange for its nukes. And Russia, posing as a guarantee of peace, a friend, a partner, but 20 years later, we saw that same friend, that same partner invade Crimea. And then we saw that same friend and partner launch a full-scale war against Ukraine. Moscow didn't just violate the treaty. It betrayed the country that trusted it. And this wasn't a mistake. This was a model. This is the Kremlin playbook. All agreements are temporary. They last until betrayal becomes more profitable. This is how Moscow operates. So first, Moscow drains its allies, and then it disappears when the crisis hits. But finally, it reemerges as a mediator, ready to profit from the chaos which it helped to create. Remember the case of Assad? Sure, everyone in the West said that he was a butcher. But Russia said no, he's our friend. He's our ally. But when the Assad regime finally started to collapse and it was all over with, the Russians pulled out of there just as quick as they could. And they wasted no time in pivoting and beginning negotiations with the new government that had replaced Assad to secure the Russian naval bases in Syria. Russia fundamentally does not change. So what did Russia do? What did Russia do in response to the most significant attack that its ally, Iran, had ever received in its history? Nothing. Russia did nothing. It did nothing to support the Iranians. Later, the Kremlin did issue a statement calling the strikes unacceptable and a violation of international law, which was quite rich coming from the very same regime that 7 days a week bombs hospitals, schools, and power stations inside of Ukraine. The hypocrisy is quite staggering. However, the most astonishing thing that you will learn when you learn Russian history is that their level of cynicism is truly unparalleled. So, going ahead, what we see is that this is not really diplomacy or really trying to help its allies. It's interested in helping itself. Now, Iran, the other side of the coin, had already given Russia everything that it could want. It gave it the Shahed drones, it gave it engineers, it gave it fuel, it gave electronic systems, it helped to violate sanctions, it helps to wash money, it helps to launder its oil. In fact, it even helped to build a drone factory inside of Russia. But when Israel attacked the facilities that had been supplying Russia with parts for its drones inside of Iran, what did the Russians do? Well, the Russians made a calculated decision. Yes, this will make things harder. Now it'll be much more difficult to produce drones. This is a setback. But this is not worth scrambling jets. This is not worth activating defense. And that's why we did not see any Russian MiGs flying in to save Iran. But Russia did issue a press release. There's something else that Russia offered, which was to broker a peace. And that offer to broker a peace, which we'll get to, it's not a partnership. It's actually a sign of Russia's betrayal of Iran. Because ultimately, Russia is not going to do anything that doesn't help it at the end of the day. So it sees an opportunity to squeeze the situation for its own benefit. And this isn't a one-off. This is how Moscow operates everywhere and all the time. Just think back in 2010 in Kyrgyzstan. There were massive ethnic riots, ethnic cleansing, that broke out, and hundreds of civilians were killed. The ethnic Kyrgyz were mostly killing off the ethnic Uzbeks. And it was a terrible period of time. They were burning people alive, and shooting was just constant, nonstop. In fact, I was living there during that period of time, so I could tell you the shooting just never stopped. And the events themselves were, of course, horrific. But let's look at the role of Russia. That was the most interesting part. The Kyrgyz government, even on TV, pleaded for the Russians to come help them. Why? Because under the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the CSTO, which is a Russian-led military alliance created to sort of mimic NATO for all of Moscow's allies, Moscow has an obligation to intervene when one of its members asks for assistance. But the Russians, for the first time I think in Russian history, were invited to invade and declined to. The Russians said, sorry, that's an internal matter, which is sort of incredible. Russia had the tools to stop the violence. This country had membership in the organization, but the Russians saw no gain to be there, so they declined. And we saw the same story break out in 2022. Remember, there was the border clashes between the Tajiks and the Kyrgyz. Dozens got killed, but the Russian troops never came, despite those countries requesting assistance. The most recent example was 2023. So you recall that Azerbaijan just flew through the Nagorno-Karabakh, took the region, and Armenia, which is a member of the CSTO, cried out for help. It asked Moscow for assistance. And Putin vanished. He did not send air support. He did not deploy anyone. He did not send deterrence. And that's the whole point of the organization. It's like a NATO country being attacked, and it's requesting assistance. This triggered the CSTO charter. It's a very clause that's there to guarantee collective defense. So what did Moscow do? It ignored the call. Russia said it was too busy doing military drills in Belarus. And why is that? Because Russia saw no benefit for itself by getting involved. And that's why at least the happy story there is that Armenia, I think, learned the lesson, and now within a short period of time was already participating in joint drills with the U.S. military. So that shows you a change of heart and realization of that Russia will not be there for you in the future. So the CSTO is a hollow organization seeking to mimic NATO, but it's a paper tiger. Because everyone seems to realize at this point that it's a shell. Russia's treaties on paper, promises made, are only leverage. They're not real protection. So when the bombs fall finally or something really explodes, Moscow makes a calculation. And if there's no profit, there's no presence. So now here's where the game flips. Let's reanalyze this past week. So just one day after Israel struck Iran on June 14th, Trump and Putin held a 50-minute call. And they discussed Iran, Ukraine, nuclear negotiations. But this wasn't just a check-in. It was a strategic move by Moscow. Putin understands that Trump is a very transactional person. So he knows if there's room for the deal, if he gives enough incentive, maybe he'll get what he really wants. So Russia pivoted from initial silence to, we wish to mediate. We could be the mediators. And why is that? Because if Moscow plays the peacemaker on Iran, it hopes that it will win something else that it really cares about, such as sanctions relief or concessions on Ukraine, or it hopes that it can extract more time, money, or diplomatic breathing room so it can operate globally. Ultimately, Russia's interest in Iran is only conditional. If Moscow can sell out Iran tomorrow for sanctions relief, it will absolutely do it. It will sell out anyone it needs to advance its own interest. Allies are ultimately just auction items for the Russians. And the Israeli strikes were not just some symbolic strikes, they're surgical. They could very well destabilize and bring down the Iranian regime. And yet, we see that the Russians will not defend the lifeline to its allies. Why is that? Because Russia is placing a gamble. Putin thinks that he's lucky. He believes that letting Iran burn might somehow buy him some leverage in the future, or presently in the case of Ukraine. So yes, in the short term, he loses some components for his drones, but perhaps he'll get a better deal on Ukraine, so he won't need the drones anymore. So ultimately, the thing that we have to be crystal clear about is that Russia is not Iran's ally. It has never been Iran's ally. This was never about solidarity. This was never about strategy. Ukraine gave up its nukes and Russia invaded. Kyrgyzstan begged Russia to help, and the Russians turned away. The Armenians pleaded for the Russians to come save them, and guess what? The Russians shrugged and looked the other way. The Iranians today are bleeding, and the Russians are simply repositioning. So this is not just a glitch. This is the very essence of the Kremlin's doctrine. Exploit, abandon, and then negotiate. So if anyone thinks that Vladimir Putin is their ally, that Vladimir Putin's going to be there for them when the bombs start falling, they're absolutely crazy. Russia's history is very clear as to what it does. It only extracts what's in its interest. And that's why Garry Kasparov has a great quote, which is, the only thing that Putin honors is power. And he respects allies he can use or discard. And that's absolutely the case today. Someone who doesn't know Russian history are the only people who believe that Russia will not just abuse them, take advantage of them. Because ultimately, this isn't just history. It's truly a prologue. Russia always behaves this way. And that's why today, when we talk about the negotiations for Iran or the negotiations about ending the war in Ukraine, you should absolutely not believe that the Russians are entering them in good faith. The Russians, without the slightest hesitation of doubt, are there to somehow get something out of it. And it's not for peace. That is not Russia's interest. Russia's interest is taking advantage of the situation somehow. And today, in the coming weeks, we should be very careful to watch what else the Russians promise to guarantee peace in Iran, because undoubtedly this will affect Ukraine. So I appreciate you watching. Please like, please subscribe. And as always, I thank you for supporting Ukraine.